I've been using a dumb phone for 2 years now. I made a video 6 months into this journey that did pretty well, and I've learned a lot of additional information since I made that video, and I wanted to share some of it with you today. I also want to share 2 ways I challenged my relationship with technology this year. The first was to spend 1 full week with an iPhone, and the second was to spend 1 week completely offline. Both of these experiences taught me a lot, but we will get to that in a bit. There have been a lot of perks to using the dumb phone that I didn't notice before, but there were also problems with using the dumb phone that I had not experienced yet when I made the first video. It is my goal to share the good and bad with you all because it's a complex change and I want to make sure it is treated as such. I really don't want to mislead anyone into making a choice that isn't right for them. I also received a bit of very reasonable criticism that I didn't consider at the time of making the original video, and I had over 1.5 years to think about those concerns, and I'd love to address them as best I can. I want to start by talking about some of the new challenges I faced as a result of using a dumb phone. The biggest challenge is that many of the systems we have to interact with to fulfill basic needs have evolved to no longer be inclusive of the dumb phone life. For example, I had gone to the local grocery mart to find my debit card was being rejected at checkout. I was just paid the day before, so it was unlikely that I was out of money, but I was unable to validate it in that moment of what was going on. Luckily, I was just buying snacks, so I just said, forget it, and I went home to see what was going on. Turns out, because I had reported that we had moved to my bank, I needed to validate my identity, and this led me to a link. This link, however, required that I have my face scanned with some app, which obviously the dumb phone did not have the ability to do. So I called the bank and informed them that I use a dumb phone and I can't validate my identity this way, but I'm happy to try other options. They said they could text me a link to the website, but I had to remind them that it's a dumb phone, I can't open links. The process went back and forth like this for a while before I realized I can pop my SIM card into my work iPhone and do it that way. I plugged in the iPhone, since it's always dead, proceeded with the creepy face scan, and then popped the SIM card back into my dumb phone once all was resolved. This obviously was a big challenge, and it was not able to be resolved with a dumb phone at all. My bank had 0 systems in place to account for use cases like mine, and while I'd love to say that they're just dumb, I can't, because I was the source of the complication here. I know that not everyone in my position has access to a smartphone, and they might not have had a way around this at all. It's really something I wanted to call out that many people had warned me about in the comments of the previous video. Online banking is a really hard thing to pull off, and I have heavily considered switching banks just based on this event alone, but I can't know if other banks will have the same issues or not. It's a tough call. It has only come up once though, and knowing that I can just use a smartphone for 10 minutes to get around it does ease my mind. Another example of this, and this is a much smaller thing, but I went out of town to visit friends, and I was at a public park going for a walk. This particular park has exercise equipment all around, and I had seen it before and I was curious what the new equipment was. They used to have signs posted next to the stations to show how to use it, but now it's a sign with the QR code on it, so I wasn't able to see how to use the new equipment. While minor, it was kind of annoying that if I did want to use it, I'd have to guess and risk hurting myself because they didn't want to spend an extra $10 to print the actual instructions. By the way, I later found out that every sign used the exact same QR code that just linked to a YouTube playlist, and you had to find which station you were on in that playlist. But that doesn't have anything to do with the dumb phone issue, it was just lazy design. One thing I found myself falling into was a bit of a YouTube addiction. I know, YouTuber uses YouTube, big news, but I kind of realized I was using my iPad kind of like I would of my old iPhone, and I would watch YouTube videos in bed before going to sleep. I had noticed some sleep quality issues, and while assessing the things that I could improve, I realized that I had a screen in my face before I went to sleep, which I know I didn't want to be doing. I tried to set a hard boundary by saying that I would not bring the iPad into the bedroom at all, but I kept finding myself slipping up. I know this can all be boiled down to the self-control comment I keep getting, but I will address that later. Anyways, I opted to stop using the iPad altogether, and that helped a lot. But then I found myself sitting at my desk watching YouTube videos for far longer than I'd like. I finally opted to cancel YouTube Premium, and I also decided to download 10 or so videos to my iPod. Having them on my iPod meant that I wasn't getting distracted by the rest of the internet, and the quality would be much worse, so I'd likely want to stop doing it. This worked wonders, and a neat side effect of it is, YouTube kept recommending me the videos that I had already watched, so I was discouraged from using the platform even more. This really helped me create a structure that allows me to continue using the internet, but without falling into the patterns I felt were harmful to me before. I obviously knew that there would be some issues, but I knew that there would be perks as well. For example, the economic perks have blown me away. Like, obviously I knew I was going to be saving some money with the phone plan and not buying a new phone every year, but it has far exceeded my expectations. I'll assume that a majority of people watching this video don't buy a new phone every year like I did, but like I said, I want to be transparent about what consistent behaviors I had before and what I've experienced since then. To recap, my cell phone plan with Verizon was $80 a month. This was not including the cost of the phone lease as I bought them with credit cards. Again, I've since learned that that's a terrible idea, but I want to present the facts as they were. I also want to account for the cost of things that were associated with the phone, like microtransactions with games like Pokemon Go, as well as streaming platforms I was using at the time. On average, I spent about $20 per month on microtransactions on Pokemon Go. It's slightly embarrassing to admit that now, but it's the reality of the situation. I did not have any other apps that required subscriptions other than media streaming. I was paying for Spotify, which was $10 a month. As for the rest, I was paying for Netflix, Disney+, Hulu, and HBO Max. I've broken down the prices on the screen here to show what I was paying for each at the time. I want to note that I stopped paying for YouTube Premium only a few months ago, so I will not be including that in the savings estimate as it wasn't really being saved on until recently. If we estimate that I paid for a new iPhone every year, which I did every year, I spent about $1,000 a year on a new phone. I will not be accounting for the interest of the credit card here because that math sucks. I called out all these extras because with the exception of YouTube Premium until recently, I stopped paying for all these services. And I associate those savings to the phone as that's where I would consume a lot of this media. So if we combine all those numbers, over the last 2 years, I would have spent $5,672 on those things. It's worth noting that I did not switch to a phone that was completely free. I still do pay for a phone plan, and I did spend money on the dumb phone itself. I also still pay for music on Bandcamp. So let's look at my actual expenses over the last 2 years related to the phone. My phone plan costs $6 per month, but my bank offers a rebate with my carrier for half off my phone plan, so I really only pay $3 per month to keep the phone working. As I just mentioned, I also spent $40 on the phone itself, and since I switched to buying music outright instead of streaming, I also want to include that in my estimate. $495 is what I've spent in total on music over the last 2 years, including digital downloads and CDs. The quick-thinking math nerds among you might have noticed that, yes, in fact, I have spent twice as much on music compared to when I was just streaming with Spotify. It's worth noting that Spotify did have a price increase, which I am not really accounting for. I'm basing it on what I was paying at the time, since I do not know when that price increase occurred. The monthly average on what I have spent on music is $20 per month, so it's almost perfectly doubled. Keep in mind, however, that this ensures two things that Spotify can't. I ensure that the artist is actually paid, and I actually own the music for life. I've talked about this before, but Spotify has a history of being ruthless to small artists, and now thanks to the sudden rise of AI-generated music, actual real human people need to compete with robots just to get a paycheck. Buying the music from Bandcamp or even iTunes ensures a far better situation for the artists, and again, it's a perk for me too, since I own the music and I can play it on any device on or offline from the moment I buy it to the day that I die. Anyways, if we plug those numbers in, I've spent a total of $607 over the past 2 years on my phone plan, and related media. I had the iPod laying around already, so that was not a cost in my instance. That means, to this date, I have saved a whopping $5,065 in total in my decision to switch to a dumb phone. That is a lot of money, and that amount of money is the reason I can say I'm finally out of crippling debt. It's crazy. Just comparing the phone plans alone, I have spent less in the last 2 years than I would have on a single month with my old Verizon plan. I also want to point out that every single one of these services I mentioned have all had price increases since I last paid for them. That means that the savings potential today is greater than ever. Now you might have noticed that I left out streaming service alternatives for shows and movies. Well, that's because I stopped paying for streaming services, because I didn't want to deal with subscriptions anymore. Password sharing getting axed, plus the writer's strike showcasing how greedy these companies are, just made me tired of dealing with it. Every service has its own crappy interface that doesn't really work half the time, and it costs an arm and a leg to keep them going these days. To replace these services, I switched to physical media and a local media server. I don't think everybody necessarily should make a media server. It comes with a lot of challenges on its own, but I like to tinker, and it's nice to be able to back up my DVDs. I will also go into a local used media shop to trade in old books and movies, and use the trade-in credit to get new shows and movies for free. Additionally, I've been using my local library, which has a massive selection of movies, shows, audiobooks, and even music. Support your local library. It's free, and it is truly the greatest thing our government has ever done for its citizens. And lastly, while I don't legally endorse piracy, if you're struggling to pay for groceries like many Americans right now, just make sure you do things the safe way. I will not be calling out any one particular VPN, as the privacy policy could change in time, and I don't want to mislead anyone. There are a lot of good choices out there, some of which are free for a single device. Please always read the privacy policy of whatever VPN you pick. If you need guidance on how to understand what a privacy policy is, I made a video about that here. Anyways, don't let me tell you what to do. Look into it for yourself and be safe from our corporate overseers. Moving on from math, I want to talk about my 1 week experience with an iPhone after using a dumb phone for 2 years at this point. I had to travel for work, and part of that meant that I needed to bring my work iPhone. I wanted to keep the usage to a minimum, so I just used it for airport stuff, Ubers, and as a keycard to get into the work office. When I got to the airport, I turned it off at the gate, and when I arrived to my destination, I turned it on so I could Uber to the hotel. I want to note that I brought along my iPod and dumb phone so I could still listen to my music, as well as call my girlfriend while I was there. I know I could have put my SIM card into the work phone, but I knew the dumb phone battery would easily last the entire week, and I suspected the iPhone would not. In fact, on the first night, I forgot to charge it, and I woke to the iPhone's battery at 20%. I used Google Maps to walk to the office, as I had forgotten to memorize the route beforehand, and then I used it as a keycard to get into the building. I plugged in it at the office, and it was fully charged after a little while. After the workday was done, I walked back to the hotel, but with no GPS this time, since I now knew the route, and by the end of the day, it was at 40% battery. I'd love to point out that this iPhone still claims that it has a healthy battery, but I was appalled that after using this thing 3 times in the entire day, it had resulted draining that much. It obviously would not survive another day without being charged overnight, so I plugged it in and started the day at 100%. Did the whole workday, once again, just using it as a keycard, and by the end of the day, it was at 30%. This was not something that I had fully grasped before. When I used a smartphone 3 years ago, plugging it in every day just felt like a normal part of my routine, and I had never thought twice about it. When I switched to the dumb phone, I obviously noticed the battery was much better, and I just got used to plugging it in every 15 days or so. That's right, I said every 15 days, over 2 weeks on a single charge, and that is still true with this 2-year-old battery. Even my iPod goes 2 weeks between charges, and I only charge it every 2 weeks because I sync it every couple of weeks to add new music. So to go from 2 weeks per charge to charging it every day, I felt like I was glued to a wall. It's amazing that I never noticed before when I did this every day, but that is incredibly annoying. I also can't understand why they keep making more power-efficient phones, but then they also put smaller batteries in there. When did one-day battery life become the norm? There's another strange thing I noticed when using the iPhone. I kept picking it up. The phone had nothing on it but Uber, the airline app, and the keycard app installed on it, but for some reason, I kept picking it up to look at it. It wasn't a lot at first, but by the end of the trip, I caught myself doing it every 15 minutes or so. I never did anything with it, it just felt like I had to make sure it was nearby. It was like picking up an old bad habit. It was weird. It was creepy that even after a few days of use, it was slightly addicting, even with nothing on it. Moving on now, I want to talk about the other challenge that I did, where I spent an entire week offline. A little backstory. When I made the video about data privacy, a small seed of frustration with tech was planted in my brain. I tried my best not to bring this out in the video itself, but looking at all the privacy policies of these massive companies that everyone uses was disturbing to me. I had wanted to make sure that I also kept up with the recent data breaches so I could add them to the description for current resources. I had the work trip with the iPhone for a week, which added a lot of frustration surrounding my feelings with smartphones, and then I made the video about VPN sponsors, which was also pretty irritating to look into. All this to say, I was fed up with tech. At the moment, I was even thinking about trying to shift my career, something that I knew was a pretty bad idea if not executed correctly. This then sparked the idea that I needed to prove to myself that I could be offline for a full week. So I planned a trip to visit friends and family, and I left without a single internet-capable device. This week was really nice. I was able to visit friends I hadn't seen in years, and I felt more connected to them than I think I normally would have. I would just sit outside and listen to the leaves rustle in the wind. It was a really calm and peaceful experience, and I do not regret doing it at all. It was the perfect tech cleanse that I was looking for. When I got back, I treated my online usage a lot differently. I wanted to be significantly more intentional about it. I thought back to how I was feeling before the week offline, and I felt more separated from technology as a whole. And if I'm being honest, the week offline probably fueled my frustration with technology. I was falling into an extreme. And while I do feel that the week offline was relaxing and well worth it, I also feel that it was sort of a confirmation bias against technology. I like technology. I love to tinker with computers. I still have a job in technology that I really love a lot, and I love making these videos to help inform people about all sides of technology. So to have these feelings that were conflicted with this appreciation I do have was hard on me. I brought it up with my therapist, and we started working on the balance of using technology. At this point, I was able to identify what I liked with tech and what I didn't, so we were able to come up with some methods of balancing these things. This is obviously very specific to myself, but I wanted to share it because I felt like I was at a point that I wanted to be totally off the grid, despite the fact that I also wanted to listen to new music and make these videos. Working through this balance was something I'm still working through, because it's a wildly complicated thing. I said in the last video, technology can be used for wonderful and good things, and it can also be used for horrible, terrible things. Both things are true, and I want to make sure I treat it as the complex thing that it is. This actually leads nicely into some of the criticism I got in the last video. I got a lot of comments saying that it simply comes down to self-control. These strangers claimed that I have no self-control over these tools and it's my fault that it's addicting. There is some truth to this. My experience of being on an iPhone and being totally offline did shine a light on some of my inability to draw these lines by myself. And there was certainly some truth to the idea that I didn't have self-control over these devices. When I got frustrated with it, I just went to the other extreme, and that obviously isn't healthy. That said, it is equally true that these devices are made to be addictive because it is profitable for these companies to do so. Making technology addicting is an entire field of study. It's an actual career that people have. By claiming that it's just an issue with self-control, you are ignoring a multi-billion-dollar industry that enables it in the first place. It is absolutely both. Again, it's a complex thing, and we should treat it as such. I know I keep saying it, but we need to allow complicated things to be complicated. I feel that oversimplification of these topics is problematic because it inherently ignores part of the story. That's why I presented this video with the good and bad of what I've experienced with this decision. I want you to be aware of my experiences and come to your own conclusions. Speaking of complex situations, thanks to the comments of the last video, I was made aware of some other uses of smartphones that I hadn't really considered before. There's a growing population of people who don't have a computer at all, who do everything on their phone. They pay bills, online bank, communicate with people, everything from the phone. This was eye-opening to me. I mean, I don't think I've ever not had a computer to use since I was a child, so hearing this kind of blew my mind and made me feel old. This situation is significantly more difficult to argue the switch to a dumb phone, as it is unreasonably disruptive. Like, let's do the math. Even on a budget, a used iffy computer is $400, a dumb phone is around $70 these days, and if you want to rely on apps for banking and stuff, you'd ideally need a tablet for around $200, which is a terrible one, but it would work. And none of that accounts for the massive shift in how you'd have to live your daily life. Paying bills changes, accessing services changes. Like, this is massively disruptive. All I can think is, if you want to make the switch to a dumb phone, start slowly introducing these other devices, but only if it makes financial sense. I know I mentioned that I've saved a lot of money by switching, but I also already had a computer, and I didn't have to spend upwards of $600 on replacement devices for a thing that might have not even worked for me. Additionally, you can aim to make the phone less addicting by using grayscale modes and stuff. It's a tough one though, and I think it's important that we talk about it so maybe we can share some ideas around. I recently started a forum for a new video coming eventually, but I wanted to open it up to y'all so you can share your experiences with dumb phones and whatnot. I think if we make these discussions easy to access, we can help those who are seeking information for their own journey. Like I said in the last video, think for yourself. I am not making these videos to tell you what to do. If you want to try it for 30 days, get a pay-as-you-go and flip phone from Walmart. If you want to try to modify what you already have, change some settings. If you want to get a flip phone but you need GPS, get a portable GPS unit. If you want to use it less, don't bring your phone into the bedroom at all. Set a hard boundary. There are a lot of valid options here because it's a complex thing. Let complex things be complex. No two situations are identical, and no one has the perfect answers for everyone. If someone claims they do have all the answers, they're probably trying to scam you. And I just want to point out that even in this very video, I'm leaving out massive groups of people just because I'm unaware of their experiences. I know for a fact that smartphones have been fantastic for accessibility for folks with disabilities. I know that a lot of what I'm talking about is also pretty isolated to North America, and I have no idea what someone in Japan or France experiences when it comes to these topics. And again, there is undeniably the point that this all comes down to personal preference. Since I switched to the dumb phone, I've noticed all kinds of wonderful things. I love talking to strangers now, and I feel substantially more connected to my local community than any app ever did. I've also noticed all kinds of horrifying things. The amount of people I see on their phones while driving disturbs me greatly, and I don't know how that can be fixed. The Don't Text and Drive campaigns were seen as a massive failure, and it seems to have only accelerated in the wake of smartphones becoming more addicting. I also learned to be bored again, and I know how I mentioned how cool I think boredom is in the last video, but I am now convinced that boredom is a good thing, and we've been completely misled by big distraction. I mean, think about it. All of human agriculture kicked off because some people were bored with the food that they had. I mean, you think cake was invented by somebody who was arguing on Twitter? No, they were bored of bread. You think the Wright brothers invented the airplane because they were doom scrolling on TikTok? No, they made it because they were bored of the ground. Embrace boredom. It has resulted in some very nifty things. I can't imagine that I will switch back to a smartphone anytime soon, if ever. That said, I also don't want to lock myself in a bubble. If I need to get one someday because I find the justifications for it to be reasonable, I will switch back. But I'll be honest, after 2 years now of using this, it is beyond my comprehension of what those justifications could ever be. Thanks for watching. If you have any ideas or experiences you'd like to share, leave a comment or check out the forum. As always, please be kind and patient with one another. Peace. There is a growing population of people who don't have a computer at all. What is that sound? Oh. It was my iPod. I put a little calendar on it.